Well, they finally did it. Someone looked at one of the most haunting, mysterious writers of the 20th century and said, "You know what Kafka needs? A slow, pretentious art film that forgets everything that made Kafka interesting." And thus, we were blessed with the new Kafka movie, a 2-hour exercise in how to take genius and smother it in grey filters and self-importance. You'd think a movie about Franz Kafka would practically write itself, man versus system. Identity crushed by bureaucracy, a writer torn between imagination and alienation. That's cinematic gold. But no, the filmmakers decided that what audiences really needed was a pseudo-philosophical therapy session disguised as a biopic. Instead of exploring Kafka's mind, they drag us through his migraines, his daddy issues, and long scenes of him staring at wallpaper like it's going to file his tax returns. It's like someone read the Metamorphosis and thought, cool, let's adapt the boring footnotes instead. You ever watch a movie and realize halfway through that nothing is actually happening? That's this film. There's no rhythm, no escalation, no pulse. Just a series of disconnected, artful vignettes, strung together with the confidence of a student film that thinks silence equals depth. We jump from Kafka's youth to his love life to a dream sequence, where he walks through a foggy office full of beetles. None of it connects. None of it builds. It's cinematic Sudoku, confusing, repetitive, and you stop caring halfway through. By the 40-minute mark, I wasn't sure if I was watching a biopic or an endurance test. Here's the problem. The director doesn't trust Kafka to speak for himself. Instead, every frame screams, "Look how symbolic I am." Black and white shots that fade into color for no reason. Random close-ups of typewriters, bugs and old staircases. Dialogue so overwritten it makes Nietzsche sound like a stand-up comic. Kafka's writing was subtle, unsettling, because it felt almost real. This movie takes that subtlety and bludgeons it with metaphor until it's begging for mercy. You want to know how to make Kafka not feel Kafkaesque? Turn every line of dialogue into a monologue about existence and have the actors whisper it they're afraid the audience might actually understand. Let's talk performances. The lead actor, bless him, tries. You can tell he read the books, practiced the slouch, and really wanted to capture the tortured soul of Kafka, but when your entire character arc is look miserable and cough. Occasionally, there's only so much you can do. Every conversation feels like it's happening. Underwater, every emotion is buried under 3 layers of ironic detachment. And the supporting cast, they drift in and out like ghosts in a museum exhibit, delivering lines that sound like they were translated from Czech to German to English and then back again by Google Translate. Even the moments that should hit, Kafka's father screaming at him, his doomed romances, are shot with all the emotional intensity of a tax seminar. Let's be honest, this movie could have told the same story in 90 minutes. Instead, it drags itself across the finish line like it's auditioning for the world's slowest screenplay award. You get long takes of Kafka walking down hallways, then more hallways, then a close-up of a clock that doesn't move, then Kafka sitting silently, because apparently we haven't had enough silence yet. At one point, I swear 10 minutes go by without a single line of dialogue. That's not art, that's cinematic euthanasia. The dialogue is a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing with as many words as possible. Characters don't talk. They announce themes. They deliver lines like, "The machine of man devours itself," or, "In the absence of reason, truth collapses into reflection." Great. But what does that mean in this scene? Nothing. It's just there to make sure you know the screenwriter owns a thesaurus. Kafka's genius was in how he made absurdity feel familiar. This script flips that around. It makes the familiar absurd by sucking the humanity out of every exchange. By the end, you stop listening. You just let the words wash over you, like background noise at a philosophy convention. Now, the cinematography looks expensive. There's fog, there's candlelight, there's moody Prague alleyways and Gothic architecture. It's all very beautiful, until you realize it's completely meaningless. Every shot feels designed for the trailer, not the story. There's no visual logic, no rhythm. One scene's a fever dream, the next is a lecture, the next is a romance that evaporates faster than you can say existential dread. It's like the director made a mood board, not a movie. You can't just throw shadows on the wall and call it Kafkaesque. Kafkaesque is about tragedy with reason behind it. This is just tragedy without reason. Is this a drama? A dream? A satire? A nightmare? Who knows? Apparently the film doesn't. It opens like a biography, morphs into a surreal fantasy, then spends the last half hour pretending to be an art installation. By the end, it's so lost in its own atmosphere that it forgets to land an ending. Kafka's death should be devastating. The man who gave voice to alienation, consumed by the same world he described. Instead, we get a slow fade, another monologue about the futility of art, and then credits, no catharsis, no impact, just a shrug in cinematic form. And then there's the soundtrack, a relentless orchestra of melancholy that refuses to let silence breathe. Every time something remotely emotional happens, the score swells like it's begging you to cry. It's manipulative, overbearing, and oddly generic, the musical equivalent of saying, "Hey, feel sad now." Kafka's world didn't need violins. It needed quiet discomfort. But subtlety apparently died somewhere around the first act. Here's the real tragedy. Kafka wrote about the absurdity of control, systems that dehumanize, rules that make no sense, the quiet horror of existing in a world that doesn't care. This movie had the chance to make that real, to connect his ideas to our modern anxieties, bureaucracy, technology, identity. Instead, it just fetishizes misery. It mistakes confusion for depth. It mistakes symbolism for storytelling. It mistakes Kafka's ideas for his aesthetic. It's style without soul, art without empathy. Look, I don't expect every movie to hold my hand, but if your film makes me feel like I need to read a dissertation just to understand why the main character opened a window, maybe you've gone too far. Art doesn't need to be simple. It just needs to communicate. And this thing? It mumbles. I watched people leave the theater halfway through, not because they hate Kafka, but because the movie gave them nothing to hold on to. No anchor, no emotion, just 2 hours of intellectual posturing and moody lighting. It's not profound, it's exhausting. By the end, when Kafka finally coughs his last breath, the film tries to tie it all together with one final grand metaphor and something about how his words will live forever or whatever. And you can feel the filmmakers patting themselves on the back. They think they've created a masterpiece. They think this is cinema. But what they've really made is a hollow echo of a man who deserved better. Kafka's life was already tragic enough. We didn't need a movie that turned it into a tedious art project. Here's the sad part. There was a good movie buried somewhere in there. A story about a man out of place, in his own world. A human tragedy about a genius. Trying to connect through his writing, you could have shown the absurdity of early 20th century bureaucracy. You could have made the audience feel Kafka's anxiety instead of just watching it from a distance, but that would require emotion. And this film is allergic to emotion. It wants to be admired, not understood. It wants applause, not connection. When the credits rolled, I didn't feel enlightened. I felt tired, drained. I just watched someone dissect Kafka's ghost under a microscope and call it art. And maybe that's the biggest irony of all. In trying so hard to be profound, the film became exactly what Kafka warned against. A lifeless system obsessed with its own rules, incapable of seeing the human being trapped inside. So that's the Kafka movie. It's not brilliant. It's not daring. It's not even particularly interesting. It's just there. A grey, pretentious monument to wasted potential. If you want to experience real Kafka, pick up The Trial or The Castle. You'll find more emotion in a single paragraph than in this entire film. Anyway, that's all from me. As always, thanks for watching. And remember, don't be pretentious, be better.